The Toyota service advisor looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your 4Runner is perfectly fine going 10,000 miles between oil changes. We've engineered it that way." 3 days later, an independent mechanic in the same city pulled the valve cover off a 2019 Camry with 112,000 miles on it and showed me something that's been stuck in my head ever since. The varnish buildup on the camshaft lobes was thick enough to scrape with a fingernail. The owner had followed Toyota's maintenance schedule exactly, not a single missed interval. And yet the pattern of wear on those cam lobes told a different story than the service writer's confidence. That's where this gets complicated, because Toyota isn't wrong, exactly. And neither is that mechanic. They're both telling the truth, just different versions of it, for different engines, different owners, and different driving realities. Toyota's 10,000-mile oil change interval didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of engineering refinement, advanced synthetic oil chemistry, and a genuinely impressive track record on many of their naturally aspirated engines. The iridescent gold of fresh 0W20 full synthetic flowing through a GR engine under ideal conditions really does hold up longer than the old conventional oil did at 3,000 miles. Toyota can point to fleet data. They can point to taxi operations in Japan running these engines hard with extended intervals and logging 300,000 kilometers without major failures. That evidence exists. It's real. And dismissing it entirely would be dishonest. But here's the thing. Toyota's interval data was built around a specific set of conditions. And the further your real life diverges from those conditions, the more that 10,000-mile number deserves a second look. That's what we're going to work through today. Not whether Toyota lied to you. They didn't. But whether that interval works for your engine, your mileage, your climate, and what you should actually be checking if you're past the 100,000-mile mark. Pay attention to this next section, because it explains why two mechanics can look at the same spec and reach completely opposite conclusions. The foundation of Toyota's extended interval argument is the quality of modern full synthetic oil. Kinematic viscosity. Think of it like the difference between maple syrup poured on a hot summer day versus the same syrup pulled straight from the refrigerator. Viscosity describes how easily oil flows under conditions of heat and stress. When oil is fresh and at operating temperature in an engine turning 2,000 RPM on a highway cruise, 0W20 synthetic flows exactly where Toyota's engineers designed it to flow. The oil film between moving parts stays intact. Metal doesn't contact metal. Everything works. The problem is that oil doesn't just sit there doing nothing for 10,000 miles. It's under constant chemical assault. Combustion byproducts, fuel dilution, heat cycling. Every time you start that engine cold, every time it reaches full temperature, every time it cools back down overnight, the oil chemistry is changing. The additives that keep contaminants in suspension, called dispersants, gradually get exhausted. The anti-wear additives, particularly the ZDDP compounds that protect flat tappet and roller components, deplete over time. And the base oil itself oxidizes. You can't see any of this happening. The oil may still look reasonably clean at 7,000 miles. But what's happening at the molecular level is a different story. Most people don't know this, but the rate at which those additives deplete is not linear. It's not a clean, steady slope from fresh to spent. Under certain stress conditions, short trips, extreme heat, a lot of idling, turbocharged engines building up heat soak, additive depletion can accelerate significantly in the final third of the interval. The oil that seemed fine at 7,000 miles may be in meaningful decline by 9,500. For a 2015 Corolla with a 1.8-liter naturally aspirated engine doing 70% highway miles in a temperate climate, owned by someone who warms it up properly, Toyota's 10,000-mile interval likely holds up. That's exactly the use case their engineers modeled. The data supports it. The long-term teardowns support it. But what about the 2020 RAV4 with the turbocharged 2.5-liter hybrid? What about the Supra with the BMW-sourced B58 engine? What about any Toyota with a direct injection engine in Phoenix in August, doing 8-mile commutes twice a day with the AC blasting? These are different animals, and they need to be treated that way. Here's where it gets interesting, because the turbocharger changes the calculus completely. A turbocharger spins on a shaft fed by pressurized oil. At full boost, that shaft can reach rotational speeds of 100,000 RPM or higher. The oil film keeping that shaft alive is measured in microns, thinner than a human hair. When you pull into your driveway after a hard highway run and shut the engine off immediately, that turbo is still spinning at tens of thousands of RPM. The oil supply stops. The residual heat bakes whatever oil is in the turbo housing. Over time, this creates what technicians call coking, hard carbon deposits that look and feel like fine gravel baked onto the shaft and housing surfaces. It's a gritty, dark crust you can feel if you run a fingernail along the inside of a neglected turbo housing. And it kills turbos. Not immediately. Gradually, expensively. Extended intervals on a turbocharged engine amplify this risk. because the oil has already been working hard at depletion conditions before it even hits that final 1,000 miles of the interval. Turbo owners going 10,000 miles should be having a direct conversation with a trusted mechanic about their actual driving conditions, not just trusting the mileage counter on the dash. Let that sink in for a second. Toyota sells turbocharged engines with the same 10,000 mile interval recommendation as their naturally aspirated engines. The engineering justification for that equivalency is debated in independent mechanic circles, and the evidence is not one-sided. Oil analysis data from services like Blackstone Laboratories has given us something that wasn't available to mechanics 20 years ago. A window into what's actually happening in the oil between changes, not just what the manufacturer predicts. Blackstone has published anonymized reports from Toyota engines across multiple model years and platforms. What their analysts consistently find is that naturally aspirated Toyota engines running full synthetic show oil in acceptable condition at 7,500 to 9,000 miles under normal conditions. That broadly supports extending beyond 5,000 miles. It does not uniformly support 10,000 miles across all Toyota applications. The turbocharged samples and the samples from high-temperature, short-trip use cases tend to show more degradation earlier, sometimes significantly more. This isn't a knock on Toyota's engineering. It's a recognition that a maintenance schedule has to be a single number printed in a book, and that number is going to be a compromise between the best-case and worst-case owner in their target market. You may or may not be the best-case owner, and this matters because after 100,000 miles, the stakes change. Wait until you hear what technicians who specialize in high-mileage Japanese engines have been saying about this, because it shifts the entire frame. A freshly built engine has tight tolerances. The machine surfaces are smooth. The piston rings seat correctly. The oil control rings keep combustion gases from entering the crankcase in significant volumes. At 15,000 miles, that engine is operating close to spec. At 100,000 miles, even a well-maintained engine has accumulated some wear. Tolerances have opened slightly. Ring sealing may not be quite what it was. And here's the critical part: blow-by. Combustion gases slipping past the piston rings and entering the crankcase carry with them fuel particles, particularly in direct injection engines, where fuel washing of the cylinder walls is a known phenomenon. That fuel dilutes the oil. An oil analysis on a high-mileage direct injection engine will often show measurable fuel content in the used sample. Fuel in oil reduces its viscosity and its protective capacity. At 100,000 miles, an engine under extended interval maintenance is starting from a slightly compromised position on day one of every oil cycle. The sound of that engine warming up on a cold morning tells you something too. That brief papery rattle in the first 2 to 4 seconds after startup, valve train clatter, some call it, is the sound of metal components running on residual oil before pressure builds. In a low-mileage engine with fresh oil, it resolves almost instantly. In a high-mileage engine with slightly depleted oil at 9,500 miles, it may last a second or two longer. That difference matters over years of daily starts. Bearings, camshaft lobes, and valve train components accumulate wear in those startup seconds disproportionately compared to the rest of the engine's running time. This is why the independent mechanics who specialize in these engines, the ones who've seen 200,000-mile Tacomas and 300,000-mile Camrys up close, often start advising something different at the 100K mark. Not because the engine is damaged, because the maintenance math changes. A slightly higher mileage engine with slightly more wear needs slightly more conservative maintenance to keep going another 100,000 miles. This next part is going to make you want to check your own car this weekend. Toyota's Maintenance Monitor, the system that calculates your oil change reminder based on driving conditions, does take some real-world factors into account. It factors in engine starts, miles driven, idle time, and temperature data to some extent. It's not a simple odometer counter, but it's also not an oil analysis machine. It doesn't know about your specific engine's ring seal condition. It doesn't know if your injectors are running slightly rich. It can't smell the faint, sharp note that develops in used oil from combustion acids building up, a smell that an experienced mechanic recognizes as oil past its prime. The monitor is a general-purpose tool calibrated for the average owner. You may not be average, so where does this leave you? What do you actually do with this information? If you're driving a naturally aspirated Toyota with under 80,000 miles, doing a healthy mix of highway and city driving in a temperate climate, and you've been consistent with your maintenance history, the 10,000-mile interval appears to hold up in the long-term data. That's a defensible position, and you don't necessarily need to deviate from it. Follow the maintenance monitor, use the specified full synthetic, and you're likely fine. If you're driving a turbocharged Toyota of any generation, evidence suggests shortening that interval to 5,000 to 7,500 miles may offer meaningful protection, particularly if you do a lot of city driving or you live in an extreme climate. This is worth a direct conversation with an independent mechanic who knows your specific application, not just a blanket assumption that turbo equals 3,000 miles. If your Toyota has crossed the 100,000 mile threshold and you've been running the full 10,000 mile interval, here's a practical step you can take this week. Pull your dipstick and look at it under good light. Natural light, if you can. Fresh 0W20 synthetic is nearly clear with a faint amber tint. Lightly used oil has a golden brown color. Oil that's been working hard is darker brown. Oil that's significantly degraded, or oil in an engine with internal issues, starts looking black and may have a slightly opaque quality rather than translucent. That's not a lab analysis. It's not definitive. But it's a quick visual check that takes 90 seconds and can tell you whether further investigation makes sense. Better yet, consider sending an oil sample to a lab like Blackstone before your next change. Pull the sample at around 7,000 miles. Send it in. Get back actual data. Wear metals, fuel dilution, TVN, viscosity at temperature. For under $35, you'll know more about your specific engine's relationship with your oil than Toyota's schedule can ever tell you. And if the numbers look good at 7,000, you can finish the interval with confidence rather than guessing. And that's not even the most important part of this, because the decision at 100,000 miles isn't just about intervals. It's about oil grade, and this is where one more layer of the debate opens up. Toyota specifies 0W20 for most of their modern engines. At the factory, with fresh seals, fresh rings, and tight tolerances, that thin oil flows quickly through narrow oil passages and provides excellent cold start protection. At 120,000 miles, with slightly looser tolerances and potentially some wear on bearings, some technicians suggest that a slight viscosity increase, moving to 0W30 or even 5W30 in a hot climate, may help maintain oil film thickness in the bearing clearances that have opened over time. This is not a universally held position. Some engineers argue that thicker oil in a modern engine with tight tolerance passages can actually reduce flow to critical components. This debate is live, it's ongoing, and the honest answer is that it depends on your specific engine's condition and climate. If you're considering a viscosity change at high mileage, that conversation belongs between you and a mechanic who has actually inspected your engine. Ideally, someone who has seen your compression numbers and knows your consumption rate. Here's the bottom line on where the evidence actually points. Toyota's 10,000 mile interval is not a scam, and it's not reckless engineering. For the right engine, the right owner, and the right conditions, it appears to work. What it isn't is a universal prescription that applies equally to every Toyota ever made, under every driving condition for the entire life of the vehicle. After 100,000 miles, your maintenance strategy deserves a fresh look based on your actual engine, your actual driving, and your actual climate. The dealer service writer who told that 4Runner owner everything was fine wasn't lying. He was giving the standard answer. The independent mechanic who showed me the worn cam lobes on that Camry wasn't catastrophizing. He was showing me what he'd seen on the table after the standard answer had been followed faithfully for 112,000 miles under conditions that may not have matched Toyota's model assumptions. Both things are true. And understanding that gap is what protects your engine. Pull that dipstick this week. Look at what you're working with. If you're close to 100,000 miles or already past it, have the interval conversation with a mechanic who knows your engine and your driving pattern, not just the number in the book. And if you've been through exactly this with a Toyota at high mileage, or you've run an oil analysis and gotten results that surprised you, share what you found in the comments. Real-world data from real owners is some of the most useful information in these conversations. Subscribe so you catch the follow-up on oil grade decisions at high mileage. That video gets into specific engine families, specific recommendations, and the viscosity debate in a lot more detail.